It's not been an easy couple of years for us as finance providers. I'd say it's moving away from being volatile now to just straight down, down, down.
It moves us on from this awful truism that only the rich can afford to make green choices, but prices are coming down across the board on electric cars, new and used.
The market is maturing. There are a lot of EVs on the road. That means a lot of people are driving them in the real world. Now we're seeing many, many more that are two-car families, both with EVs. A healthy market is one in which everybody is participating. If we had a much, much higher penetration of dealers selling EVs, that would be a huge, huge help.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Battery, a new series from EV Battery Solutions where we chat with industry experts about the biggest EV topics shaping the industry today. I'm your host, Erin Baker, and each episode I'll be joined by a different leader from the world of automotive and electrification. This week, I'm delighted to welcome Paul Hyne, Commercial Director for Transport at Lloyds Banking Group. We'll be talking about the hot topic of EV values and finance. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into it. Hi, Paul. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
So, maybe you could start by just giving us an overview of your role and your background in automotive, such as it is automotive finance. Are you new to the industry? Are you here man and boy?
So somewhere in the middle. So I work for Lloyds Banking Group, as you say, Lloyds Transport, as we call it, which encompasses the Black Horse retail finance brand for car dealer finance, and Lex Autolease, which is mainly leases for company cars and vans, and Tusker, which is our salary sacrifice brand. So we cover the whole market. So I've been with Lloyds about 3 years now. Prior to that, I was in another top 5 leasing company, and then for the few years before that, I was in industry. So, but in automotive, but on the customer side. So I've been around a while. And yeah, my background really is the sort of finance and accounting side. I'm an recovering CFO, so now on the sales side.
We'll forgive you.
Yeah.
Welcome across to the dark side of the business. I've got to ask you this question. I'm straight in here with a question that isn't on the pre-agreed list, but I'm just going to plunge straight in with it. Do you drive an EV?
Yeah, I do actually. Well, actually, I'm plug-in hybrid.
See, we didn't rehearse that one, thank God.
Absolutely. Yeah, plug-in hybrid now,
Yep.
but I am down to the final 2 of what I'm going to choose for my next company car. So yeah.
And will that be a plug-in hybrid or will that
No.
be pure
I'm
electric?
going full EV. Yeah, exactly. It's a difficult choice. There's a lot out there to choose from, but no, I've gone one step ahead of that. I've just done the whole house with solar and battery storage and all the rest of it. So I'm trying to get as lower a carbon footprint as I can. So
yeah, I was just about to ask you if you had off-street parking, but you've got the whole shebang.
I've decided to go all in. Yeah, exactly. So I'm catching up with my wife. She's in an EV today, and I'm just catching up.
Okay, so clearly you are a convert. You think EVs are the thing.
Absolutely. I'm an accountant, so I'm just going to go for the lowest cost possible, and an EV is it for sure.
Right. Well, if that comes from an accountant's
Yeah.
mouth, we know we're all safe. So maybe you can just explain a bit about what your role entails.
So I cover quite a wide range. So I look after residual value forecasting for all of the businesses. I look after that really involves trying to predict the future value of cars, so we can set the pricing for our leases or our finance.
You've had an interesting 12 months with electric, then I'm sure we'll come back to that shortly.
Yeah, I've had many interesting months recently. I look after all of the sort of sales teams across the 3 brands. And then I have a sort of sustainability team as well that looks like how can we at Lloyds or in Lloyds Transport try and broaden out what we do, so it's not just about the car. So hence the home retrofit I talked about a minute ago. And then everything else in between, remarketing, how we manage those assets, how we kind of keep the risks of residual values as low as possible on behalf of Lloyds Banking Group. And then, of course, that translates into lower prices for our customers.
Great. And before we move on, sorry, you just mentioned sustainability there as part of the role. Can you just say a bit more about that?
So clearly as part of the business that I do with Lex, we advise corporates on their own fleets and how they can transition from ICE, be it vans or cars, into EV or a lower carbon footprint. So we've got a team of people that do that and help our customers understand where they can do that most effectively, lowest cost, all of those things. But we feel that that's more like a business as usual thing now. So now we're looking at, okay, a part of Lloyds Banking Group, how can we help our broader customer base, our mortgage customers, for example, who might drive an EV? How can we look at home retrofit for solar or heat pumps or battery storage or get ready for vehicle to grid? How do we as a bank help the transition outside of just the car. So
That's really fascinating, isn't it? Because it's a bellwether for how the conversation around electric cars has widened. And what I keep saying to retailers about how you've got to be prepared when a customer walks in the door and it's their first electric car that they're thinking about. They're not just thinking about their next car. They're thinking about their first foray into the world of electrification and lowering their carbon footprint across their lifestyle.
yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, as is the case with me, it all comes down to economics. You know, if you can feel a financial benefit to doing something, it helps you make the decision to do it. And so clearly, I'm not the only person at Lloyd's looking at this. We have a whole range of people in a whole range of departments, but transport and automotive is the kind of gateway to the conversation we feel, which is why we put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah. And it's also, it moves us on from this awful truism that used to exist about only the rich can afford to make green choices, basically, right? Because those of us who don't, it was a luxury. It certainly always has been. And it was at the beginning of electric cars. Well, we'd all love to lower our carbon footprints, but we can't afford to.
Yeah,
But prices are coming down across the board on electric cars, new and used, and everything is becoming slightly more affordable. It's still not the most affordable transition for a lot of people. Things like solar panels and heat pumps and all those other
yeah.
aspects come at a price. But I suppose in the first instance, this is about explaining the cost of that to consumers and where perhaps they can gain efficiencies.
Absolutely, and it's no different in the home environment as it is in the automotive, in that you've got to achieve scale to achieve low cost. And so, as we're seeing now on EVs, there's more and more of them around. The value's going down. More and more people are driving them, and the economies of scale are such that it's becoming a cost conversation. So we're seeing things like EV grants coming back and new lower cost cars. That should and does happen in the home environment. Cost of solar panels, heat pumps, batteries, it's all coming down. And so
Hmm.
the more people we can engage in the conversation, the more people can make their own decisions. It's not going to be right for everybody,
Mm,
and that's okay. But for lots of people, it will be, and an increasing number can do that.
mm. Are
Um,
you beginning to have conversations about vehicle to grid? Because that,
yeah,
as a motoring journalist, that's the area that fascinates me, next.
yeah, absolutely. And this is where I've got to kind of temper my own enthusiasm,
Yeah.
really, because as a sort of an automotive person, and I've always been a bit of a petrol head. Now I'm kind of getting excited about the numbers side of, well, actually, I'm not paying X pounds on petrol and diesel, and now I'm bringing my household bills down. But now I'm looking at how many kilowatt hours I'm using across a year, and how you can kind of reduce that. You sort of what's the term? I think I call it gamification. I think people use so it just becomes a different kind of conversation, albeit right now I'm probably in the very small minority of people that are having those sort of thoughts.
Yeah.
But I can see where I think the market will head. And I'm in a privileged position. I've worked for a large bank who has a lot of customers in a lot of different segments where we could actually do something about that.
It's weirdly addictive, isn't it? I keep
Yeah,
looking at all of the apps that I've got, watching my costs overnight on my off-peak tariff and thinking, my goodness, that would have been £100 worth of petrol and it's been £9.78 on my off-peak tariff.
yeah. Not everybody's as sad as we are, but hopefully there's a few of us out there.
There's always hope. Um, okay, so let's talk a bit about used EV values. Um, why do you think they are so volatile compared to ICE vehicles? And I suppose more importantly, what does that mean for finance providers like Lex and Black Horse?
Yeah, it's not been an easy couple of years for us as finance providers. There's a lot of volatility. I'd say it's moving away from being volatile now to just straight down, down, down. So there's no up, which is a challenge because ultimately, we're a commercial business. We're here to make money, and it's difficult to do that in a market where the vehicles you're financing are falling in value way faster than you'd ever predicted. And so why does that happen? Lots of reasons. I think probably if I were to try and boil it down, there's just a general imbalance at the moment. If we take it from all the incentives at the moment around EVs are on new cars. Even the most recent grants that have been announced are on new cars. There's not really anything that I'm aware of on used, other than people like me and other finance providers are trying to create some incentives. But broadly, there's nothing. So there's just this huge imbalance. You've got all these cars coming into the new market without really a reliable and predictable route into the used car market.
Mm.
If you're in the used car market, you're sort of thinking about making a switch perhaps. There's a big polarized debate about it. You've got evangelists on one side, you've got real detractors on the other, how do you find a way through all of that? How can you really find real world experience that helps you make your decision to go from something that you know and you've always driven into something that's unknown that is used and might break down or might blow up according to which newspaper you read or anything else. So within that, it just creates m- instability, lacks confidence, and so there's not enough focus on that side of the market, and that's for me the main reason why we're seeing this volatility in prices.
Do you also, I'm in the media. I am a journalist, so I suppose I probably over-index on reading the headlines and tracking the daily, the hourly news updates from Tariff World and so on. Um, but do you find, does that drive volatility as well? Because every time there's another announcement by another American president, um, something happens, consumer confidence falls or grows. The British government has been guilty in the past of rowing back on 2030, then going forwards again, then coming back.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of consumers on radio phone-ins and so on say to me live on air, but hang on, we were pushed into diesel, then we were pushed out of diesel. Surely the same thing's just going to happen with electric. And so, that adds to the volatility.
It does, and that previous sort of announcement changing the goalpost of 2030, 35 back to 30, that did have a big difference. We saw that. We saw a lot of consumers who were preparing to make that transition because they thought, well, this time I better get a car because 2030 is coming up, and then it went out to 2035, and we saw applications drop drastically, and hasn't really recovered, even though the current government have brought that back. So that created a lot of volatility. What I am seeing now is the market is maturing. There are a lot of EVs on the road. That means a lot of people are driving them in the real world and talking about them. And so that that sort of, if you like, dulls the noise of negative press, perhaps by people who haven't ever really tried an EV. And so there's a little bit more of a narrow sort of field of volatility, if you like. So
Yeah,
over time it's
yeah,
narrowing, but we're only at the beginning. It's
yeah.
been, well, I know EV's been on the road for 10, 12 years, but in a big way, only the last 5 or 6. And so that's going to take a long time to
Yeah.
feed into the market.
And it's extraordinary, isn't it? I look at that perception versus reality gap around consumer concerns over charging, reliability, electric cars catching fire, whatever the latest headline might be. Perception shoots off a cliff in terms of negativity and worry.
Yeah.
And then you get, as to your point, real world users generating their own content and their own feedback on their cars saying, well, I've had none of these problems that I foresaw, that I worried about, that I had preconceptions about. None of them materialize. We know that electric car drivers are doing higher average annual mileages than ICE drivers. So the usage case is a good news story.
Oh, absolutely, and I see very clearly in my own data on a business user basis, I'm getting 90 to 95% renewal back into EV.
Really.
On a retail side, albeit it's a smaller number,
Hmm.
ultimately, it's around three quarters. And I think that may be more around the brands that I work with on the retail side compared to the big business and fleet side. There's more
Hmm.
more brands on that side rather than consumer sentiment. But in any case, three quarters or more of drivers in my world are renewing into another EV and not going back.
Yeah. Well, that's
And
compelling, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And as I say, the vast majority of what I see is business to business, and that's 90% plus.
Yeah.
And I've now got customers that are third generation EVs, so and maybe taking a second EV in the house now, whereas maybe even 2 or 3 years ago, you'd have a company car or whatever as an EV because it was a cheap option, and a diesel or a petrol as your
Yeah.
second car.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing many, many more that are two-car families, both with EVs. So the
Yes.
market's changing.
Yeah. Says it all. Okay. So back to residual values. Um, Residual value risk is, as we've established, at the heart of your world. How has the shift to EVs challenged the traditional ways of assessing and managing that risk? We've touched on it, but let's talk about it a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's the one thing that keeps me awake at night. It is the center of my world. It's we've got about 250,000 EVs that I finance on the road today.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge sum of money, which Lloyd's holds the financial risk to that, and so it's an area we've put an awful lot of focus in. So there's a lot more variables now. So the traditional way of setting RVs was very simple. You had lovely reams and reams and reams of historic data. nice and simple. It was a petrol or a diesel. You might have a bit of volatility in the model, or whether it was an SUV or back in time a people carrier or whatever. Now you've got whole new brands, different models, new powertrains, no data whatsoever historically. So you just got to kind of
Is it a
find a
nightmare or an opportunity? Or
well,
both?
we've yeah both yeah we've chosen to call it an opportunity. So what we've done is started again from a blank sheet of paper. So I
Wow.
spent the last year and a half creating a whole new way of doing RV forecasting. The principles are the same, but the way you do it is very different. So we've now got an entire ream of data that comes from all sorts of different sources. We've got a model that can consume all of that data. We're using AI tools and machine learning to help interpret that and predict different things based on scenarios.
What sort of sources are you using for your primary data?
So, so a lot of data from the market. What we're seeing in used prices today on retail. So the traditional way of doing it, you'd look at
Right.
an auction price. That sort of thing. You wouldn't really look too much on the retail price. You look at what's going through the auctions, and that's kind of how it works. Whereas these days, a lot of fleet sales. Again, I'm coming from a fleet perspective. Yes, you get auctions, but actually a lot more is now direct to consumer on the remarketing
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Remarketing in general is a lot more digital, online, and visible than it was even a few years ago.
Mm.
So you're getting all of that traditional data set and the market providers of that data. But now, again, Black Horse is one of my businesses. We are a huge used car funder, so I've got a huge bank of data that I'm seeing in today's real world market. So we can consume all of that data. We can extrapolate where we need to, where we don't have history. So, a new OEM, for example, we can say, well, the last new OEM entrant with this type of car behaved in this type of way,
Quite tricky, isn't it?
it's really
Because
tricky.
if you look at all the new, if I think over the last 5 years of new entrants, you had everything from Fisker, BYD. I mean, some very different brands
Yeah,
coming to market.
and still tiny volumes.
Yeah.
It's there's no perfect answer here. So the best you can hope for is have as big a data set as you can get hold of and be very dynamic. You don't expect it to stand still for very long, and just have the ability to react at least as quickly as the market moves. And that's what we can do now, which a year and a half ago, like many people in our industry, we used a very traditional way of doing it. So we think we're as good, if not better, than anybody else. But the proof will be in the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah. And do you, thinking about data sources as well, if it's a brand, it's new to market in the UK, but it's an established brand in China or America, do you look at the market data from over there, or is there very little point because the UK market is so unique?
The latter, absolutely. There's not much value in looking at what's happened in another country
Mm,
because, if we take China as the example, there's a whole different set of incentives, there's a whole different set of cultures, and a lot of small city cars. It doesn't. The UK is very different. The UK,
mm,
certainly in the markets I will operate within, is very much brand orientated, like a big flashy thing on the drive, rather than a utility to get you from point A to point B. So there's different dynamics around kind of the local market. Uh, there are some near neighbours, let's say, on the continent where we could look, but
yes, yeah.
actually, in our part of the world, we're about as mature a market as you can get. Perhaps Norway being the exception.
Mm,
Definitely been there, had a look, and tried to learn what's going on there. But again, it becomes less relevant because of the differences in government incentives, for
yeah,
example,
yeah,
and the different stage. Norway are way ahead of the UK in terms of culture. They're pretty much 100% BEV. We're 20%. So even then, you can learn some
yeah,
lessons, but it's a different market. So you've got
yeah.
to be able to use your own interpretation and sort of plan.
Just as a complete by the by, I did a road trip in an EV in Norway a couple of years ago to test out the infrastructure and the public charging and how it was to drive it in a mature and more established market. And actually, forget cars. I got electric ferries everywhere. It was
Yeah.
absolutely extraordinary. But come back to your point, it became part of this electrified ecosystem that
Mm.
one was living in. And suddenly that gives you a whole new view on electric cars as it all makes sense in the context, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And to go back to the point we were chatting about earlier around negative sentiment and myths and things, Norway is a hugely sparsely populated country over enormous geography, a lot of which is outside of city centres and things like that. So, and I went there in December, -15, and so EVs kind of work there. So
Mm,
the fact that we say, well, if it won't work in cold weather, you can't charge anywhere. Well, if the Norwegians can make it work,
yes.
I'm pretty sure we could.
Yes. Turns out you can.
Mm.
Um, So coming back to consumer uncertainty around EVs, which as a journalist I see all the time, and the narrative is frustratingly hard to shift. It's still the same old barriers to purchase, that I'm hearing. All the price range. It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't matter what the reality is. It's the perception that you've got to shift.
Yeah.
How does that consumer uncertainty feed into depreciation, and what can the finance industry do to improve confidence? I mean, as a journalist, I'm doing everything I can to get out there in front of people on TV and radio and everything I write to say, I understand your worries, because I think that's an important part of it. The
Yeah.
worries are real
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
understandably so. But here's the real world data, here's the information you need, and here's the reality from owners of EVs that just aren't experiencing the things that you're worried about. But what are you guys? Where are your heads at?
Look, consumer confidence and depreciation are exactly correlated. With any market, it's simple economics of supply and demand. So if consumer confidence is low, people won't buy used EVs, and so the prices fall. Simple, and vice versa. So there's an awful lot to do around myth busting. We do a whole myth busting series where we just try and put out some objective data points. Some of the ones I mentioned earlier around the number of renewals we see in the EV market in the different segments. It's important that we're honest about some segments are higher than others. Um, Outside of that, um, on the sort of if we look at the sales side of the equation on the used market, what I see and what concerns me is the concentration of used car dealers in EV land. The ones that are stocking are basically the OEM networks
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
dealers and some of the larger sort of car supermarkets.
Hmm.
But there's a whole swathe of independent car dealers that don't touch EVs.
Yeah, right.
And now they've got valid concerns. There was drops in the market, the volatility. If you're a small car dealer, you don't want to be holding stock that suddenly depreciates hugely overnight because of policy changes or,
Yeah.
or an OEM decides to discount their cars or whatever. So they're valid concerns. But even underneath that, if you look at the dealers that are stocking EVs, a lot of the people that are selling those cars don't drive EVs and haven't driven EVs. So how can they speak with authority? You usually get one kind of expert on each site, in my experience, which isn't enough. So there's much more we can do. And as a finance provider, we can provide training, we can provide offers, we can provide other things that will help stimulate the market and help give confidence to those dealers that don't stock EVs to stock them. And we can learn much more about the things that we could do to help that. And I'm doing that. So there are two sides to every coin, and I do think that on the sort of sales side, there's more that can be done on
Mm,
top of all the things that you're doing around general
mm.
perception of EVs.
There's also, isn't there? I mean, I do a lot of stuff segmented by gender and look at female consumers. Why are they behind the curve with EV? Because they are, and it seems to boil, all the data that I've looked at. It seems to boil down to a lack of confidence in making the switch. Why is there a lack of confidence amongst women? Because there's a lack of knowledge. Why is there that lack of knowledge? Because the industry, whether it's the automotive media, the automotive retailers, or the OEMs themselves, don't quite know how to reach out to women in the spaces where women exist.
Mm.
Women don't read car magazines, they don't watch car reviews on YouTube, they're not interested. So go and talk to them where you are. But one of the things I looked at as well was finance and financing cars and how women felt about that. And it's extraordinary because whether it's actually petrol, diesel, or electric, it's still this kind of sense of finance is the last bit of the conversation once you've chosen the car, and actually all the effort goes into choosing the car, and then you've chosen the car and you go to buy it and the dealer says, well, how do you want to pay for it? And you go, oh, I don't know, what are the options? Well, I suggest PCP. What is that? Monthly payment? Yeah, fine, let's do that. Because it's more jargon and I'm jargoned out and
Mm.
I don't understand and I don't want to start getting into a very tiring, tricky conversation at this stage. I feel like there's more to do around finance conversations.
Absolutely, and from what I see, that the retailers that do it really, really well, that focus on EVs, that have those right conversations, have got much better finance kind of conversion, let's call it, because from a consumer's perspective, if you're having a PCP, then if ultimately you're moving the risk of the residual value of that car onto the finance company. So if in 3 years at the end of your agreement, your value was predicted at 15K, let's say, and let's say the market's fallen, the car's worth 10, then that's okay. That 5,000 loss isn't your problem. It's the finance company's problem. You can just give the car back. And so there's a real benefit on that. Certainly if you're unsure about things or if the battery's not going to last or whatever, there's a huge consumer benefit that's not well understood to car finance
Mm.
products, which is why, from my perspective, it keeps me awake at night trying to predict these future values, because if I get it wrong, there's a huge consequence for that.
Yeah. Wow. Rather you than me. Um, we must touch on the government's not so recently announced now, I suppose, £3,750 maximum electric car grant, which raised many eyebrows for many different reasons in the industry. But if we just stick to the effect of the announcement on RVs.
Yeah, almost impossible to predict at this stage. It's a little bit early. I mean, what I would say is, yeah, it's changing all the time, but there's clearly only a proportion of vehicles available for sale that will qualify. We've seen a lot of manufacturers that are just discounting cars to the value of a grant, and then
Yeah,
they're taking
yeah,
the risk.
yeah.
Um, and I've been in the market a while now. I'm a finance guy, as I've said. If the price of new cars go down, then so does the price of used cars.
Mm,
So from a residual value perspective, there will be negative consequences. That being said, there's another side to the debate, which is the grant has generated an awful lot of interest in used
mm,
electric vehicles, or electric vehicles generally, and so more and more people are looking at them that perhaps weren't before. And what we've seen through some of our data is um, used car buyers that perhaps were looking at petrol and diesel have had a look at what electric vehicles are out there in the market, or had a look at a new electric vehicle because they now think they can afford it, and seeing there's some real bargains out there. So
yeah.
we have actually seen a bit of an uptick in demand for used electric vehicles as a result of the EV grant. So it's really hard at this stage to know if that increased demand will ultimately lead to a
Mm,
better, more stable used car market for EVs or not.
mm.
So the jury's out. Is I'm going to stay firmly on the fence on this one for now,
Fair enough.
but there's a
I
lot of
mean,
things going on.
we'll just add it to the list of uncertainties
Yeah,
around in the
absolutely.
market at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
And what role do you think, OEMs, remarketers, data providers play in stabilising the used EV market?
Yeah, I've sort of said some things on this before. I think there's just a general lack of collaboration. There's far too much what about me in this? Be it an OEM, a finance partner, a data provider, whatever, looking at what's in it for them and what matters to them, rather than let's all kind of work together, kind of agree what a common set of challenges are and work together to try and address them. And so that could be, a range of different things. If I take one OEM discounting their cars, so they can meet their ZEV mandate target without really thinking about the consequences for the broader market, or a particular funder entering or withdrawing from the market because the risk is high or low at that time. It doesn't really help. And so if I could ask for anything, I'd ask for a little bit more collaboration.
You'd be surprised that this is a key theme emerging from this series: collaboration across the board in the industry.
Oh, there you
Absolutely.
go.
There you go. What then ultimately does a healthy market look like?
Very difficult question to answer. But what I would say, a healthy market is one in which everybody is participating. So I talked a bit earlier on about there's probably, I don't know the number, but a huge chunk of car dealers don't stock EVs today. That's not healthy. That's very clearly not healthy if we want the future to be EV, which according to the ZEV mandate it will be. So we do need to fix this problem. So for me, in the relatively short term, if we had a much higher penetration of dealers selling EVs, that would be a huge help. So that would probably be the one thing that I would say would be an indicator of a healthy market.
Nice, crystal clear. I like it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been a pleasure having you here today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to all of you for watching. Please remember to like and share this episode, and follow EV Battery Solutions Europe on LinkedIn and YouTube to keep up to date with the rest of the series.